The gentlelady from New York is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank my friend for yielding me the customary 30 minutes and yield myself such time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, I feel as though I could give the same speech today that I have delivered repeatedly in the Rules Committee and on the House floor for the past 3 years. Despite failing 37 times before, the majority is trying the 38th and 39th time today to repeal, defund, or otherwise undermine the Affordable Health Care Act. However, unlike past votes, today's attempt to undermine the law occurs on the very same day that my home state of New York delivered incredible news to New York families. Today we learned that thanks to the Affordable Care Act, health insurance premiums for many of my fellow New Yorkers will be reduced by 50% or more. In my district alone, 56,330 persons will be eligible to access those savings through New York's new health exchange. Now, New York is just the latest in a growing number of states finding the same thing, including state of Washington, Oregon, California, where the cost of the health care premiums are being reduced because of the Affordable Health Care Act. As the New York Times reported this morning, some individuals in New York, low income, could see their premiums go from $1,000 a month, Mr. Speaker, to as low as $308 a month, and subsidies provided for the lower income persons through the Affordable Care Act will drive those premiums any lower. Believe me when I tell you, New York does not want to be relieved of the burden of the affordable health care. For many of them, it will be the first time in their lives they've actually been able to afford it. This is incredibly good news for millions of people in New York and a realization of the law's promise to provide more affordable health care. Now, among other accomplishments, the Affordable Care Act is increasing competition in New York because 17 insurers have been approved to participate in the individual insurance marketplace. That competition, again, Mr. Speaker, as all of us know, is what helps to bring down the cost, and that is working. And meanwhile, on top of that, as we know, the Care Act requires all insurance companies to spend 80 cents of your premium dollar on your health care, then we know that that will even add to the tumbling costs. And perhaps most importantly, the individual mandate included in the Affordable Health Care Act will soon take effect, driving down costs even more. Given this fact alone, it is the height of irresponsibility and nihilistic obstruction for the majority to attempt to delay its implementation one more time. Delaying the individual mandate would undermine the very foundation of the Affordable Care Act and cause health care premiums to skyrocket. In fact, the Urban Institute has estimated without the individual mandate, an extra 13.8 million people would go without insurance because of the cost. Now, everyone from doctors to health insurance companies knows this fact, and indeed they are working together in New York to effect this act. And that's why organizations such as the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association oppose the majority's proposals today. In a letter to Congress, the American Academy of Family Physicians recently wrote that the individual mandate is, quote, the foundation of improving access to care and vital to ensuring everyone has health insurance coverage, end quote. For that reason, the American Academy supports the health coverage requirement and urges that we get on with the program. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is the majority's proposal is nothing more than an attempt to score cheap political points. As has been the case for the last 3 years, the Senate will not take up this bill, and everybody here knows that. And even if they did, by some strange quirk of fate, and pass it, the president would veto it. He said so already. So we're spending another week of legislative business doing meaningless piece of legislation that we know will not go anywhere. When we should be rejoicing, Mr. Speaker, about the things that are coming in from states that have already set up their exchanges, about the money that's being saved, and the many, many more people being insured. I've said many times before, the estimated cost of running the House of Representatives is $24 million a week. Of all people, The members of the majority who claim to care so dearly for stopping wasteful spending should be objecting to a legislative agenda that holds a variation of the same go-nowhere bill for 39 times. Bridges are collapsing. Our economic growth is anemic. Millions of Americans are unemployed. And if the Farm Bill passed here last week were to become law, they would not only be unemployed, they would not be allowed to get food stamps to help them feed their families. Meanwhile, sequestrations, closing Head Start programs, furloughing working moms and dads, and cutting programs that serve vulnerable populations, such as our Indian population living on reservations who are hit extremely hard by sequestration. Yet instead of addressing any of these issues, the majority continues to play this game. Such a self-serving political pursuit is a shameful mark on the history of this chamber and our democracy. Etched above the Speaker's rostrum is a quote from Daniel Webster that speaks to the need to end the political games and to focus on issues that are important to the American people. In part, the words read, quote, "Let us see whether we also in our day and generation may not perform something worthy to be remembered," end quote. In 2010, I was proud to play a central role in the passage of the Affordable Care Act. I faced a lot of vitriol because of it. In the darkest moments, my district office was vandalized and the lives of my grandchildren were threatened. Yet I remained dedicated to passing the law because at the time health care costs were approaching 20% of our nation's GDP, and an unconscionable number of Americans were being denied their basic health care because of the cost or pre-existing conditions. And in 8 states in this United States and the District of Columbia, violence against women, domestic violence, was considered a pre-existing condition. No more. Before voting on the legislation, the Democratic caucus read the bill 3 times, line by line. By the time it was signed into law, it was clear this legislation would deliver on the promise of secure and affordable care for millions who had been denied health care for far too long. Looking back at that moment in time, it is my belief that the law we produce will go down in history, as Webster says, as something worthy to be remembered. Already, thanks to the Affordable Health Care Act, seniors have begun receiving preventive screenings and subsidies to cover the cost of prescription medicines as we close the donut hole. In a few years, the donut hole will be completely closed. In addition, children under the age of 26 are now protected under their parents' insurance coverage while they find their first job and start a life of their own. And finally, as I said, prior to the Affordable Care Act, in 8 states, disgracefully, domestic violence was considered a pre-existing condition. Those policies are now outlawed, and soon no health insurance plan in the country will be allowed to deny an individual coverage because of pre-existing condition, and women will no longer have to pay a higher price for their insurance than men simply because of their gender. All of this incredible progress is because of the Affordable Care Act. So while repealing the mandate may serve the narrow political interests of the majority, it is a dangerous proposition for the health and well-being of American families. Americans deserve a Congress focused on solutions, not a 39th attempt to rehash debates of the past. Mr. Speaker, as we debate yet another go-nowhere attempt to undermine the Affordable Care Act, I urge the majority to read the words above the Speaker's rostrum and put an end to their need and their tired political games. It is past time for us to get to work on meaningful legislation to help the American people. I urge my colleagues to oppose this rule and the underlying legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentlelady